You didn't choose pleasure. It chose you, not in a conscious moment of celebration, but in those quiet hours when you felt bored, restless, invisible. You reached for the cookie, the feed, the body, the noise. But it wasn't joy you wanted. It was silence, interrupted. Somewhere along the way, we stopped asking ourselves why we chase what we chase. We confuse relief with healing. We treat stimulation like salvation, and worst of all, we call it freedom. But tell me, when was the last time you smiled without needing a screen? When was the last time you felt seen without performing for it? When was the last time you were alone? And okay, Carl Jung didn't condemn pleasure. He feared what it concealed. Because underneath every compulsive scroll, every impulsive craving, there's something else. A question we refuse to ask. What are we really trying to avoid? This isn't about morality, this is about awareness. And awareness, once awakened, doesn't return to sleep. In this video, I'm breaking open the hidden architecture of pleasure, not to shame it, but to reveal what it's built to bury. By the end of this, you won't hate pleasure. You'll simply stop mistaking it for the cure, because it never was. Let's begin. 1. Why we feel empty after indulgence. There's a moment right after the laughter fades, when your eyes wander to the corner of the screen, and for a breathless second, you feel nothing. Not joy, not regret, just a space that shouldn't feel so hollow. It was supposed to be fun. You reached for it out of habit, maybe even celebration. But now that it's over, you're left wondering what it even gave you. This isn't about guilt, it's about confusion. What was the point of that distraction? Why did it pull you in so easily and leave so little behind? Carl Jung understood this feeling. He knew we often misinterpret what we pursue. We label a moment as pleasure when, beneath the surface, it's serving a different purpose entirely. A buffer, a shield, something to stand between us and something harder to face. Most people aren't aware they're doing this. They say they enjoy the scroll, the buzz, the taste, and maybe on some level they do. But look deeper. Do those moments bring clarity? Do they offer something lasting? Or do they simply fill space that once felt unbearable? It's subtle. The mind learns quickly. Repetition becomes ritual. Soon we no longer reach because we want something. We reach because we don't know what else to do. That's when pleasure becomes a mask. It wears the face of contentment, but it conceals absence. We confuse stimulation with connection, when what we really need is stillness we haven't made peace with. This isn't about rejecting pleasure, it's about seeing it clearly. The real danger is not in the indulgence itself, but in our blindness to the role it plays. When you find yourself consuming without presence, repeating patterns without question, you're not in control. Something older, something unspoken is pulling the strings. Pleasure without intention becomes an echo. It mimics joy but never delivers it. It becomes noise layered over a silence we're too frightened to hear. And yet that silence might be the only honest part left. 2. Why we keep chasing what never satisfies. It starts before you even notice. A flicker of discomfort, not sharp enough to name, but familiar in its restlessness. Your fingers move toward your phone, or the fridge, or a voice you don't really want to hear, but know will respond quickly. What you're doing isn't about reward. It's about interruption. Something beneath the surface has stirred, and rather than let it speak, you fill the gap. The mind is clever. It learns how to self-soothe with shortcuts. A taste here, a glance there. Enough to shift your focus, but never deep enough to resolve anything. This kind of hunger doesn't growl. It whispers. It says, I need something real. But it gets answered with something easy, and that's the trap. We stop trusting the signals. We interpret longing as need, discomfort as failure, silence as something to be erased. But if you paused, just once, and let that impulse sit without acting on it, you might hear something different. You might notice the ache isn't asking for pleasure at all. It could be pointing to a space inside you that hasn't been touched in a long time, not physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. Carl Jung spoke often about the soul's quiet language. He believed that when we ignore its voice, we don't stop hearing it. We just drown it beneath louder ones. So we chase. We chase what never quite reaches us. What if the hunger isn't a flaw to be fixed, but a sign that something authentic still wants to wake up? When you follow every craving without listening to its source, you end up further from the self you're trying to soothe. You gather more, but feel less. It's not emptiness that hurts, it's the distance from your own truth. And the worst part is, we rarely question it. We assume craving means something's missing. But maybe it's the opposite. Maybe craving is a signal that too much of the wrong thing has built up, crowding out what's essential. The next time it hits, don't ask, "What do I want right now?" Try this instead. What am I postponing by reaching for this? The answer might be unsettling, but it will also be real. And for once, reality might feel better than relief. 3. How childhood teaches us to replace emotion with stimulation. Think back to when emotions were new. You were small, uncertain, and the world didn't explain much. You cried, not because you wanted something unreasonable, but because you were trying to be understood. But that didn't always work. Sometimes your tears were met with silence, or replaced by distractions. A toy, a treat, a cartoon, anything but acknowledgement. The lesson didn't come with words. It came through repetition. Over time, your mind began to connect discomfort with rejection and stimulation with relief. Pain became something to be ignored, not explored. What mattered wasn't how you felt, but how quickly you could switch the subject. No one told you this directly, but you learned. The moment discomfort surfaced, so did the urge to cover it. Not with reflection, with noise, something bright, fast, and pleasing enough to keep the discomfort at bay, at least for a moment. As you grew, the tools changed, but the reflex remained. The phone replaced the toy. The drink replaced the cookie. The performance replaced the tantrum. But the intent stayed the same. Suppress, disguise, move on. Carl Jung called this the beginning of the shadow, the part of the psyche we learn to hide. Not because we're ashamed of it, but because somewhere along the way, we stopped believing it would be welcomed. So you become skilled at smiling when you don't mean it, at appearing fine while carrying storms inside. You convince yourself that numbness is preferable to vulnerability. But numbness doesn't just erase pain, it dims everything. The cost of denying emotion is not just emotional, it's existential. You start to lose the signal of who you are. The authentic parts become faint. What's left is performance layered over impulse. There's a reason so many people feel hollow after the fun ends. It's not the pleasure that's broken, it's the disconnection that comes with avoiding what's real. It takes courage to feel fully, especially when your earliest lessons taught you that feeling openly made others uncomfortable. But that courage is where healing starts, and healing, contrary to what we're sold, isn't glamorous. It's slow, it's quiet. It's the practice of noticing your urge to run and choosing to stay just a little longer. 4. Why silence feels unbearable. Try sitting in a room alone. No music, no scrolling, no tasks, just you and your thoughts. How long before your fingers twitch towards something familiar? There's no threat, no pain, and yet unease creeps in, almost immediately. That discomfort isn't about the environment, it's about the confrontation. Stillness isn't passive. It brings things forward that distractions bury. Regrets, fears, longings that haven't had a voice in years. When Carl Jung wrote about individuation, he wasn't talking about becoming someone new. He was describing the slow return to the parts of yourself you've been ignoring. The parts that surface the moment things go quiet. But in the world we live in, presence has become a lost art. We mistake reaction for aliveness. We confuse noise with connection. And the more we avoid ourselves, the harder it becomes to remember what presence even feels like. We don't fear silence because it's empty. We fear what it reveals. And so we build habits that protect us. Not from danger, but from depth. A soundtrack in the shower, a show during dinner, a podcast before bed. All designed to ensure that the moment between tasks never arrives empty-handed. But what if that emptiness held the key to something you've been seeking? What if the reason everything feels shallow is because you've forgotten how to stand still? It's not about avoiding enjoyment. It's about noticing when the pursuit of it starts to override your ability to simply exist. Pleasure is beautiful when chosen freely, but when it becomes the reflex response to discomfort, it loses its vitality. Real presence feels different. It doesn't entertain. It doesn't distract. It witnesses. And that kind of witnessing can feel unbearable at first, especially if you're not used to being alone with your truth. But presence is how you reclaim authorship. It's where impulse ends and intention begins. And when you stop running from the quiet, something unexpected happens. You start to hear yourself again. 5. Why stimulation isn't healing. It's easy to believe that if something makes you feel good, it must be good for you. But that idea, while comforting, often leads us further from the truth. Not every smile means something healed. Not every rush means something shifted. And not every craving, once fulfilled, leaves you in a better place. We've been taught to see stimulation as progress, to celebrate the temporary fix as if it's a lasting solution. You finish the show. You close the deal. You scroll past 100 images and land on one that makes you laugh. It feels like something's been accomplished. But has anything actually changed? Carl Jung warned against confusing movement with meaning. The external world offers endless feedback, but rarely does it tell you what you most need to know, whether you're closer to yourself or further away. And that's the danger of unchecked pleasure. It's convincing. You feel better in the moment, so you assume you're okay. But deeper inside, the root remains untouched. Stimulation can quiet a symptom, but healing demands listening to the source. You've likely had moments where, after indulging, the satisfaction faded quickly. What remains isn't guilt, it's recognition. Something inside you knows that what you just fed wasn't what was truly hungry. That's not a moral failing. It's an emotional signal. We chase stimulation because it's accessible. It offers results instantly. Healing, on the other hand, doesn't work on a timeline. It's not visible to others, there's no applause for it, which makes it easy to overlook. But the cost of overlooking it is cumulative. The more you soothe the ache with entertainment, the further you drift from the part of yourself that's trying to speak. So what can you do? Start by noticing the difference between what lifts you and what distracts you. Pay attention to how you feel after. Do you feel expanded or more fragmented? Stimulation isn't evil. It becomes dangerous when you expect it to do the work of transformation. True healing doesn't come with a dopamine spike. It arrives in the subtle moments, when you choose to stay with the discomfort rather than silence it. And over time, those moments create something that stimulation never can. A sense of wholeness that doesn't depend on the next fix. 6. Why resisting impulse rebuilds trust in yourself. Some choices don't shout. They emerge quietly, right before you click, just as you reach, just as the urge sharpens. You tell yourself it's minor. One more message, one more bite, one more video. It won't ruin your day. And maybe it doesn't. But over time, something else happens, something harder to name. Each time you act on impulse, you reinforce the idea that it owns you, not with force, but with familiarity. There's no fight, just a quiet surrender. And each surrender shapes how you see yourself. It's not about the content of the choice, it's the consistency of giving in. Carl Jung believed the unconscious isn't hidden, it's rehearsed. We live it without noticing. And many of us have rehearsed instant gratification so well that we forget what discipline even feels like. But discipline, when rightly understood, isn't control. It's connection. To delay an impulse isn't to deny pleasure. It's to ask if the pleasure is real. You pause, not because you hate the desire, but because you respect it. You want to meet it with your whole self, not as a reflex. That pause, though small, sends a deeper message. I can handle this moment without escaping it. The more you do this, the more a shift occurs. The craving doesn't disappear, but its grip weakens. What replaces it isn't punishment, it's clarity. You begin to remember what satisfaction feels like when it's earned, not forced, not rushed, something that arrives after presence, not in place of it. This shift builds something stronger than willpower. It builds trust, and that trust isn't loud, it's quiet. It shows up when you're alone, when no one's watching, and you still choose what aligns with who you want to be. There's a strength in that kind of restraint that isn't about denial, it's about sovereignty. You're no longer driven by what's easy, you're guided by what's true. 7. What real pleasure actually feels like. At some point, you stop wanting more and start asking better questions. Not, what can I get right now? But, what experience would leave me more whole than when I began? That's when your understanding of pleasure starts to shift. It's no longer about intensity, it becomes about depth. You begin to realize that not everything that feels good is good for you, and not everything that takes effort is a burden. Carl Jung called the process of becoming whole individuation, not a path of constant improvement, but one of reunion. A reunion with the neglected parts of yourself. And pleasure, when approached with care, can be part of that reunion. But not the quick kind, not the kind that disappears the moment it ends. There's a kind of pleasure that stays with you. You don't have to chase it. It doesn't demand, it doesn't try to cover anything up. It's subtle, it leaves you quiet. It reminds you of who you are, not who you're pretending to be. This kind of pleasure comes in strange places, finishing something you once avoided. Sitting in silence and realizing it doesn't hurt anymore, letting go of a habit and noticing that nothing collapsed in its absence. That's the sacred part, because now you're not reaching for something to numb the ache. You're creating space for something real to emerge. It's not euphoric, it doesn't spike your nervous system, but it lingers. And in that lingering, it teaches you that presence, not stimulation, is what you were missing all along. This isn't about rejecting life's sweetness. It's about choosing the kind that doesn't ask you to abandon yourself, to taste it. The sacred isn't in what's loud, it's in what holds meaning after the moment passes. And the people who find this kind of pleasure begin to change in quiet, subtle ways. They react less, speak with more care, look others in the eye, not to impress, but to connect. The world doesn't reward this shift, but your soul does. Because for the first time, pleasure isn't a way to escape life. It's how you return to it. What if the craving was never the problem? What if the real issue was how fast we responded to it? You see, pleasure doesn't destroy us. Our need for it to fix everything, that's where the damage begins. We scroll to forget. We eat to silence. We chase to feel. But none of it lasts. And deep down, we already know that. Carl Jung didn't ask us to eliminate pleasure. He asked us to confront what it was distracting us from. Because until we do, pleasure is just anesthesia. And anesthesia feels safe until you wake up and realize you've been asleep for years. Look at your life. Where have you built rituals around avoidance? Where have you said just one more when you meant, I can't face this? That's not indulgence. That's an unspoken cry. Not for more, but for meaning. The moment you begin to ask, what am I actually feeling beneath this craving, you start the work. Not glamorous work, not Instagrammable, but the real kind, the kind that rewires the soul. The person who no longer needs to be entertained is dangerous. Not because they're cold or removed, but because they are clear. They know silence isn't empty. It's honest. And in that silence, something else begins. Not detachment, but return. A return to self-trust, a return to stillness that doesn't suffocate, a return to pleasure not as an escape, but as a choice made with full presence. You will still laugh, you'll still dance, eat, enjoy, but the taste will be different, not sweeter, deeper, because you won't be running anymore. You'll look around and realize, I don't crave like I used to, because I'm no longer hiding from myself. That's what changes everything. Send this video to someone who thinks pleasure is healing. It might wake them up.